Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are now in our third season of helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, dietitian, running coach, twin mom, and fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchuk Performance Nutrition, I've spent over a decade helping runners learn to fuel their bodies better, unlock their best running performances, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. This podcast is all about helping you become the very best runner you can be by teaching you the running-specific nutrition, training, and recovery strategies that you need to reach all your wildest health, fitness, and running goals. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, join me each week as I share my best advice, interview guest experts, and talk to everyday runners who are conquering their goals by tapping into the power of performance nutrition, with a side of some myth busting too. And if you're looking for even more tips, resources, and strategies for runners, you can find me on Instagram at Steph the Runner's Dietitian or by visiting www.stephanienatchuk.com. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Start today's episode, I just want to really quickly invite you to download my free fueling guide and strength training guides for runners. Currently available as a handy little bundle for you all in one at the link in the show notes. So just to give you more information, in this free fueling guide, you're going to find my top fueling tips for runners. As well, in there, I've put together some meal ideas and even a couple of recipes for your pre and post run fuel. We've also got some suggestions for what to fuel with during your run to make sure that you just have the best overall performance possible. If you've really been struggling to understand what to eat, when, where to start when it comes to supporting your running with better nutrition, this guide is here to help you kickstart your running journey. The other guide that I mentioned is my strength training guide for runners. We know that runners are notoriously bad at consistently getting their strength training in. So this guide includes both a PDF resource, it's got some tips, some guidelines, as well as a link to my series on YouTube where I walk you through all the exercises in this program, giving you some suggestions on proper form, how to modify if needed, how to progress things if needed. This is a really great beginner's guide to strength training for runners who want an effective but efficient full body workout that is going to support the key muscles and movements you need to run stronger and help stay injury free. So once again, both of these guides are available as a handy little bundle. So you just click on the link in the show notes, enter your email address once, and both of the free guides are going to get sent to your inbox right away. I really hope that you find these guides helpful and that they support you and your running goals in the most effective way possible. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are here today to talk about how much time you really need to train for your race. And I thought this would be a great thing to chat about as we are currently, I'm recording this right in the middle of summertime. We're in the last couple days of July. And of course, we've got a lot of fall races coming up and coming up quickly. And so, I see two things happen out there in runners land. The first is that, I have a lot of clients who are signed up for their events months to like a year sometimes in advance, sometimes even a little bit more than a year. And with a lot of the bigger events, of course, the world majors, Disney races, some of the really prominent, popular events with lottery systems and registration opening so early, you do need to commit. And if you're going to be participating in some of these events or not, you've got lots of time, right? Like there's months to prepare. And then on the other side of things, I'll sometimes have people reach out to me who, they're looking for a training plan. The race that they have that they're, signed up for, looking to sign up for, is at that point like exactly 3 or 4 months away. Right? We have not a lot of wiggle room here. There's not a lot of room for error with this training plan. And, I've just got my fingers crossed that we're going into this with a solid base. And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, but we always do our best to make it work and make it come together. But there seems to be sort of two opposite ends of the spectrum. We either have all the time in the world, or we have very little time and need to make sure that we're very dialed in and very on the ball with committing to that training plan. But having tons of extra time to prepare for an event, sometimes that can get us in a little bit of trouble too. And it's so fascinating because it's almost like we have so much time to prepare. We don't actually know how to spend that time because it's too early to actually start training, right? Like most training plans you see, even a full marathon, you're looking at like 16 to 20 weeks for most full marathon plans that you would find online. Now, of course, a coach would make you a longer training plan, but it's probably going to include more, basically base building weeks leading up to it. Depends a little bit on your base mileage, but it's almost like we have so much time that then we can end up wasting some time. And then all of a sudden it's crunch time and we haven't put in the base miles that we really should be. So part of what I want to talk about in today's episode is not just how much time you really need to train for a race and some different factors to consider when thinking about how much time you need to prepare, but also looking at what do you do with the time leading up and what do you do with your time in between races so that when you do want to put something on the calendar, even if it is coming up relatively quickly, it's easy to get up to the volume that you need, or it's easy to dial in your intensity and some of your workouts to make sure that you're prepared to hit your goals for that particular race. So that's what we're going to get into here today. Now, it's definitely not a one size fits all thing, right? Like, how much time you need to prepare for a race, how much time you need to train is going to vary dramatically from runner to runner. And this is based on a couple of different factors. Of course, the first is going to be what is your goal for that particular event, right? Is this your first time running that event? Running that distance? Is it your first time building up to a 5K, a 10K, a half, a full, an ultra, whatever it might be? Are you a newer runner or do you have a lot of experience under your belt? Building up to these distances for the first time, especially as a newer runner all around, is a much bigger undertaking physiologically and physically speaking than doing it for the 12th time or the 20th time or whatever it might be. If you've been a very consistent, 5 or 10K runner for a long time, now you're going to go ahead and train for a half marathon. That's also going to be a lot easier on your body than going from, say, couch to half marathon kind of thing. So your running history plays a huge role here in how much time you should really give yourself to build up to this race distance, especially if it's a new race distance for you. But also, what is your goal? And, for a lot of people who are tackling a specific distance for the first time, the goal ideally is to just complete the distance, right? Just finish the race. However, if you're a little bit more experienced with a specific race distance, then you might have a time goal in mind, say wanting to do like a sub 2-hour half marathon. And if that's the case, then of course we need to make sure that we have adequate time to build up both the volume and the intensity, because we want to avoid, again, as a newer, less experienced runner or somebody who's maybe coming back from injury or something like that, we want to be careful that we're not overloading too much stress in a short period of time. We don't want to be trying to add in the volume that we need to prepare for this half marathon while also working in, goal pace work and doing workouts that are specific to that sub 2 half marathon. If you are already comfortably running base mileage, that it's not a huge uptick to get you to the volume that you need to build towards that goal race, then it's much easier to add intensity to that schedule. But if your base mileage is lower or perhaps even somewhat non-existent going into that training plan, you're going to need to focus more on that versus just getting faster. If your goal race is like 6 months or more away, then focusing now on building up that base mileage is really beneficial. Building up your base mileage to whatever you can comfortably run consistently. There is no magic number for how many base miles you should be running on a weekly basis, but building it up to whatever you can consistently and comfortably run until it's time to pick it up for your race training plan. Because if you don't really know what you're doing and you're like, oh, I've got lots of time, but like all the plans I see are, at the very most 4 months, 16 weeks. What should I be doing from now until then? And you're kind of just flailing around, not being consistent, and you don't really know what you should be doing. The focus now is base building, but you don't need to continuously build volume every single week with your base building. You might just build up to running maybe, 20 to 30 miles a week and doing that consistently until it's time to pick it up for your training plan. Because then the jump in volume, when you're already comfortably running that much, feels much less strenuous and is much less stressful on your body than going from 0 or close to 0 all the way to whatever volume, whatever mileage that training plan is going to start at. Because few half and full marathon training plans are going to start at 0, right? They're not going to start at that very beginner sort of, 10 miles a week kind of thing. You're probably going to start at maybe 30 plus miles per week for a marathon training plan. And so we don't want to need to build up to that first. And then, of course, you're running out of time. So thinking about, as soon as you're thinking about putting a race on the calendar, as soon as you have put a race on the calendar, especially if it's within the next 6 months, knowing what your overall training plan and focus is going to look like is very important. So we're not leaving anything to chance, we're not leaving anything to guesswork, and we're not accidentally running out of time because we didn't build up to the base volume that we needed to really then be able to pick it up for that plan. And then, of course, we have to look at your time availability to train, looking at your weekly schedule. How many days per week can I commit to running? What is the frequency? Do I need to adjust other activities? Do I need to cut back on other activities if I'm a multi-passionate, multi-sport type of person? How do I make sure that I can fully commit, especially, again, if we have a time goal in mind? If we have a time goal in mind, it's a long race that we're doing, right? A half or a full or an ultra. We kind of need to go all in on our commitment to our running plan. And if we have a lot of other activities, a lot of other volume, a lot of other things on our plate, then we might struggle with reaching our goals because we just can't commit to running the miles that we need to. Some people have no problem with this. And of course, I've coached athletes who do lots of other activities, and I'm sometimes amazed at how much they can fit and what they can recover from. But it's just adding more to your plate. And so we want to make sure that you're going to be able to be consistent, be committed, and get through that training plan without burning out or, of course, getting injured. Looking at your overall timeline and, understanding what your whole approach to this training strategy and training schedule is going to be is really important so that you can make sure that your goals and your timeline and your priorities are all aligned, right? We don't want you to get injured from doing too much volume too soon, right? We can only tolerate so much of an increase week by week in volume. Too much too quickly is a major cause of injuries. We want to make sure that we're not rushing the process so that you aren't going to be healthy at the start line of that race. We want to make sure that the time commitment to training aligns with everything that you can do in your life and all your other obligations. And we want to just avoid getting partway through a training plan and just totally burning out and crashing. If that's ever happened to you, I've seen it happen to runners where, we start off maybe feeling pretty good and feeling really excited. And then it's like all these other things, all these other obligations and work and just everything kind of starts to pile on. Plus, we get all this running in and maybe at the end of the day, the timing of that particular race wasn't the best fit for you. Maybe you need to plan your races at a slower time of year, at a less busy time of year, or maybe be able to more thoroughly commit to that particular race and put some other things on the back burner, put some other things to the side for those weeks that you're doing, your highest volume weeks. So thinking it through, being really intentional about your timeline and about the races that you choose so that you enjoy this process and that you don't get to the end of it and you just cannot wait for this thing to be over, because that's not fun either. All right, so next we're going to talk about how much time you need to give yourself to train for some different race distances, just a general timeline, and understanding the difference in terms of your goals. So first up, we're going to talk about 5K. So if your goal is just finishing your 5K, then this might be anywhere from like 4 to 6 weeks. A couch to 5K type of program. This might include some walking for race day. You might be going into that race planning on doing a walk run type of strategy. It really depends on your goals. So you can, as a fairly new but consistent runner, you can definitely increase the volume needed to finish a 5K in about 4 to 6 weeks. If you're someone who's completely new to running, like you've never run a single step in your whole life, and you're just going to start, you want to sign up for a 5K, I would give you a little bit longer. I would say giving yourself like 3 to 4 months to start from zero and build up, especially if you have injuries, if you're injury prone. If you are maybe not even currently walking for 30 minutes straight, those are some of the things that are maybe going to increase the duration of how much time you want to give yourself. But if you've been like running, you're running for maybe it's, 20 minutes a couple times a week, you're running a couple times a week, maybe you're maybe you're walking for 30 to 60 minutes a few times a week right now, and you want to build up to doing a 5K, then 4 to 6 weeks is a great amount of time. If you have a time goal for your 5K though, so if you can comfortably complete a 5K, but you want to get the time for that 5K down, then this is where you're going to want to give yourself maybe a little bit more time, so 6 to 10 weeks, to add the volume that you want for improving your aerobic base. Because yes, even though a 5K is a relatively short distance in the grand scheme of running races, it is still a predominantly aerobic event. And the other important consideration here is that we still want to improve our aerobic base. It's not just about adding speed and intensity to our training plan, but still actually adding a pretty good amount of volume, including a long run, not a 20 miler or anything, but we do still want to include a long run as part of our 5K training approach. And so you want to have a little bit more time to prepare. You're going to want to be adding in some speed work, some specific work for whatever your goal is for that 5K, giving yourself a little bit more time to get there, and including a short taper to get you ready for that goal that you have for that race. Now for a 10K, if your goal is to just finish the 10K distance, I would recommend, that you can at the very least complete a 5K, maybe with or without some walking. At that point, you can build up to a 10K in probably 6 to 8 weeks' time. If you're starting from zero, like if you are signing up for a 10K and you are currently not doing any walking, running, etc., then you're definitely going to want more time to get there. That might look like, again, 12 to 16 weeks. So not super different from your 5K buildup. It's going to be a little bit of a steeper climb, especially with those long run and longer volume days. But you can get there. Again, if you're injury prone, if you're coming back from an injury, if you have very little experience with any kind of endurance sport, then you might need more time. If you are maybe a very consistent athlete in another sport and you're transitioning to running, then you might get there a little bit faster. This might not be a huge strain to get to a 10K distance. It just depends on what your starting point is. If you have a specific time goal for your 10K, maybe you've got some experience running 10Ks and you want to just dial it in a little bit in terms of your finish time, this is where I would want to be looking at, a solid aerobic base, a consistent running strategy and a consistent, history of running up until this point. And then your actual 10K training plan could be anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. For a half marathon, your just kind of finishing goal, if you're just looking to finish, you're looking at that being anywhere from, 12 to 16 weeks for a half marathon training plan. You may plan to do some walking on race day, which is completely fine, and plenty of runners do. But I would want you to already be pretty comfortable completing a 10K distance, either running or doing a run walk approach to a 10K. You don't necessarily have to have a ton of history with racing 10Ks, but you want to be able to tolerate that amount of time on your feet and that amount of volume on your joints and on your muscles and on, all of your connective tissues and everything like that, and not be getting injured with completing a 10K. From there, then, the 12 to 16 week build up to finishing a half marathon is very much within your reach. But you're starting with that base, essentially, of being able to complete that 10K, whether that's running or a walk run approach. This is where, primarily it's going to be that long run that we're starting to see getting longer and longer. And that's the part where we want to have enough time to gradually, week by week, again, no more than about 10% per week, increase that distance for your long run to get you up to finishing your half marathon. So that's going to be what we're looking at just to finish the distance. If you have a time goal for a half marathon, so if you are a little bit more experienced with running half marathons and you have a specific time goal that you want to accomplish, then we do want to be starting off with a little bit of a higher base volume. So you probably want to go into that training plan already having a little bit more consistent running under your belt, already be running a bit more in terms of miles per week consistently. Again, so we have less volume that we're looking to build over that time, but we're able to add in the intensity and add in those race specific workouts to get you to the goal time that you have. And same goes for a marathon. If you're looking to run a marathon, if we're talking about, your first marathon and you just want to finish the distance, I would highly recommend being pretty comfortable, at least completing a 10K. Again, you don't have to be consistently running half marathons every weekend or anything like that in order to run a full. I think having a 10K as kind of your base is a great start, but you are, again, going to want to have plenty of time to get up to the volume needed to successfully finish your marathon. And this is going to be a minimum of 16 weeks. So going from, your longest distance completed being a 10K up to, the long runs and the volume that you want to complete for a marathon, minimum of 16 weeks. Of course, you can give yourself longer and spend those weeks in between consistently increasing your base, again, slowly and working up to whatever you can run consistently and comfortably. But that's going to be a minimum just to kind of get you to the point where you can finish a marathon and get through that training plan, again, without increasing your risk of getting hurt along the way. If you have a specific time goal for the marathon, then I do encourage, having a little bit of a higher base volume going in so that it's easier, right? We don't have to add as much volume to your plan, but we can add in more intensity, emphasize, dialing in maybe fueling strategy, maybe hydration, some of those other factors that are going to, potentially make a really big difference when it comes to your performance on race day. And being able to add in the specific workouts that are going to help you to get across that finish line faster. All of this, we're talking about goal finish times, also depends on how much of a stretch or, how much of a reduction in finish time is that from your previous PR. If we're talking about shaving off a couple of minutes, it's not that that's ever easy, but you can follow a similar training approach and maybe end up being able to beat your previous time by a couple of minutes. But if you're really, gunning for a significant change, a significant improvement in your finish time, then you might need a very different training approach, which might look like more volume going in, more volume overall, harder workouts, right? More specific speed workouts around your goal finish time, spending more time at goal pace or a little bit faster than goal pace, longer workouts, things like that. So definitely upping the ante and getting into more of those advanced strategies as your goals and the challenges that you're setting for yourself are getting loftier. Then we get into ultramarathon territory. These are the kinds of events that you definitely want to be giving yourself plenty of time to get ready for. This is often a year or multi-year process to get ready for some of these very long events. Now, an ultramarathon is anything that is longer than a full marathon, which is 26.2 miles or 42.2 kilometers. So an ultramarathon can be anything from, a 50K, which is only a little bit longer than a marathon. It probably doesn't feel like that when you're running it, but it's just a little bit longer than a marathon, all the way up to, 100, 200 multi-day types of events. So with ultra running, you are going to need to be the kind of runner who is very consistent and very dedicated to running and running a lot all the time, right? The base and the physical strength and endurance that you need to be able to complete these events, get through the training and also get through the event is tremendous. So if you've got your sights set on ultra running and you want to become an ultra runner, just know that it's something that is very much within your reach and something you can very much accomplish. But we don't get there quickly. We don't become the kind of runner who can successfully complete ultras and complete ultras strong in, just only being a runner for, say, 6 months. So we need to have that really strong base and also be ready to give ourselves lots of time to build up towards being able to do that. We also need to be really dialed in with things like strength training, nutrition, getting enough recovery to be able to tolerate that volume that we need to be successful with completing these events. So that's, kind of looking at everything from 5K to 10K, half, marathon, ultra, and, all these different distances. How much time approximately do you really need? And what I'll say is that, going into any race training plan with a pretty solid base under your belt is really only going to benefit you. There's never an instance where, oh, that was a waste of time, unless you're getting yourself injured because you're running so much that you're getting injured. Of course, that's never a good thing. But the more miles you can consistently run, the more aerobic base you're going to have going into a race specific training plan, which means you're going to be better set up for faster race day performances. But it's a fine line to walk because, it's how much volume can we recover from? That's always the question. Generally speaking, more volume is beneficial. However, there's always that tipping point where that amount of volume, now you can't recover, now it's too much. And just knowing where that is for you and how other life stress plays a role in adding to what you can recover from and what you can absorb is something that just comes with a lot of maturity as a runner, and knowing that more isn't always better. Driving yourself completely into the ground is not a good thing. And sometimes we need to scale back a little bit, but knowing that we can just increase it again and get our fitness back and just allow those fluctuations throughout the year, depending on what else is maybe going on in our lives. If we can't let our foot off the gas or feel that we can't let our foot off the gas for fear of what that will do to our fitness, when other things in our lives are very chaotic, very hectic, very stressful, that's what leads us to long-term burnout and overtraining. So instead, finding that balance and being able to just shift gears and shift focus and be okay with that throughout the year, throughout the seasons of life, I think sets you up for much better consistency long term and more continuity with your running so that it isn't, 100% all in, balls to the wall, and then the complete crash and burn and needing to take lots of time off before we can start again from scratch. Backing off a little bit and then getting right back into it when we can is going to get us much further in the long run than always being like pedal to the metal 24/7, can never take a rest day until we're forced to, and then we just completely crash out. So that was a little bit of a tangent. But the last thing I want to talk about today is how do you know you are ready to start a training plan? So maybe you're just getting into running, you're kind of new to the sport, and you've just, been dipping your toes in the water. Maybe you're doing a coach to 5K type of plan. Maybe you're just, getting out there for 20 or 30 minutes a few times a week. You're really enjoying it. You're like, hey, I think I want to sign up for a race, but like, what race should I sign up for? Am I ready? So I've kind of given you the timeline there of how much volume or what you comfortably should be able to do before choosing a race. But then how do you know you're really ready? The first thing I always want people to understand or want people to think about is what are your goals for that race? And one of the things that people will ask me about is, what do I think their goal should be like in terms of finish time? And we can talk about that, of course, as your running coach, we can get into what's maybe realistic, what's a good goal to set that might challenge you for that event, that kind of thing. But one of the other questions I get is like, well, am I going to be run walking or am I going to be running continuously? And there's no right or wrong answer here, right? You can always walk. I don't care what distance you're running. I don't care what race you're doing. You can always walk and you can always plan to walk. But what do you want for your plan to be for your race day, right? Do you want to plan to walk as part of your strategy? Or would you like to practice running continuously and have your strategy be built around a plan of continuous running? If on the day you want to take a walk break here and there, absolutely, there is no shame in taking a walk break. But do you want to plan to take walk breaks or do you want to aim and train with the goal of running continuously? Maybe not for this first race, but maybe for, future races. Again, no wrong answer here. Both are great, but just knowing that also gives me a ton of information to know if you're ready to start a training plan and, of course, what that starting point might be. The second thing to look at is, are you currently consistent with your running? Most training plans, to be successful to race all of these distances, I really recommend running at least 40 or at least 3 days a week, at least 3 days. For the longer distances, 4 or 5 days a week is great. You can get away with running 6 days a week, but you're probably going to have to do more double workout days to fit in your strength training and be the kind of person who can recover fairly quickly and have a pretty good turnaround time on just having one day off to recover. Otherwise, it can be a lot to kind of juggle that training load, especially if you have other, obligations, other life stress. So somewhere between 3 and 5 days a week of running, but making sure that we can fit all of these things in and, of course, adequately recover. Do you have the time and energy required for the additional training load, right? Are you in a stage of life right now where adding on a training plan, adding on an extra commitment is a good idea, is something you can commit to, are happy to commit to, are excited to commit to? Are you signing up for this race for the right reasons? Do you want to do this race for the right reasons? What's your why? What's your motivation behind signing up and planning to do this race? Just making sure that that's really in alignment with everything else you have going on in your life and what you want for yourself. Because if it isn't, and if you're signing up for, especially something like a marathon for the wrong reasons, because you think you should, because you're trying to get, bounce back after having a baby or something like that, it can end up being a recipe for disaster. It's just making sure that you're ready, you're in a place where you're ready to train, you're in a place where you're ready to commit, and all of those other aspects of recovery around this are dialed in. I have been through postpartum in the last couple of years, and I see that there are women out there who are signing up, as soon as they get the go ahead to start running again, they're signing up for a marathon, in a couple of months after they're given the go ahead to start running. And some of these runners might be very, very experienced, dedicated, you know, high performance marathoners going into, having a baby. And they might be able to build back their fitness and get their strength back really quickly. But just from my own personal experience, it probably took until my kids were about nine, maybe 10 months until their sleep was consistent enough. Like they were always fairly good sleepers, but their sleep was consistent enough that I was sleeping consistent enough to feel like I could start getting back into a very consistent training schedule, and for some people it might be shorter, for some people it might be a lot longer, where you are getting the rest and the sleep that you need to be able to get up and have the energy to have a good quality workout. And so if you got back into it much faster and you did great, then that's great. But if you are wondering, then I will say, give yourself more time, And so I gave myself, I did do a half marathon this past spring. I did one, and I have a marathon coming up in a couple months now. But I, gave myself probably a good 6 months of just essentially base building, like just getting back into a consistent routine, just getting up and running 5 days a week, like just that amount before I started tackling a race again. Well, I did one 10K in there. Anyway, doesn't matter. Give yourself lots of time and just make sure it's the right season of life for you, not just adding extra stress to your plate when you maybe don't need it. All right. So to wrap up for today, I want to thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you found this episode helpful. Just thinking ahead about your training calendar, thinking ahead about, what makes sense to put on your plate right now. How much time do I need to prepare? And what should I do if I do have a lot of time before my race, so I don't feel like I ended up wasting that time and don't feel like I ended up getting the most out of all of that time that I had to prepare. And so we want to avoid jumping right into a plan without any kind of base. Even if it's just a base of getting ready for a 5K, we want a base of at least being able to walk for 20 or 30 minutes. Again, pain-free, injury-free before we make that jump to running. We also want to avoid just having a generic plan that doesn't coincide with our lifestyle, doesn't coincide with our needs, and isn't flexible, doesn't kind of change with us. And we want to make sure that we are taking into account other life stress, making adjustments for things like travel, work, etc. So give yourself more time than you think you need to get ready. Vacations, illnesses, injury, deload weeks, tapering, all of those things really come into play, especially if we do have a fairly short timeline to get ready for an event. I would rather you have, not use up those incidental weeks and get in an extra long run or two, right? That you end up having more time for, versus missing a couple of really key workouts or long runs because you didn't have enough time to prepare. You didn't account for a vacation week that you had in there. You didn't account for some deload weeks that you needed. You didn't have enough time for your taper, all that kind of stuff. So just thinking ahead, really being intentional about your timeline, planning it out well in advance, making sure that the race that you're choosing is the right one for you. So I hope that you found today's episode helpful. I want to thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you now want some help building a plan that works with your schedule and having an approach to training that is customized, that's flexible, and helps you take the guesswork out of your training so you can be consistent and confident every step of the way, I would love to invite you to check out the Fuel Train Recover Club. This is my signature online program for runners. We currently have spots opening up for the coming month. I'm opening up some additional spots in the program. And I'm really excited to share that we are also including with your membership access to a personalized meal tracking and planning tool all in one that has been an absolute game changer in my business that I've used with my one-on-one clients for years. I'm now offering this tool to my club members, which is really exciting. I've been getting some wonderful feedback about it already. You can check out more about the Fuel Train Recover Club and all of the amazing stuff that we offer in there. The link is in the show notes. And I've also just recently recorded a full program overview. So if you really want to take a closer look at everything that's inside the club, all the different features, resources, tools, what you get in terms of coaching, all that kind of stuff, then there is a free preview that's a full overview of the program. You can check that out. Again, go to the link in the show notes. It'll take you over to that webpage and you can see what you get inside the club. And if it feels like the right fit for you, if you want to join us, then I would love to have you and love to get started. And as I mentioned, we've got some additional spots opening up this month. And so you can grab one of those before they're gone. All right, that is it for this week's episode. Once again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to hang out with me, and we will catch you right back here next week. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.